Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 9th TransformGov Talks. Lovely to have you all with us. Hands up if you've been to TransformGov Talks before. Welcome back. We're obviously doing something right. Hands up if this is your first time with us. Welcome. We hope that we do something right tonight and you decide to come back next time. I'm Gavin Freegard. I'm your chair for the evening, and lovely to see so many of you here in the room and also joining us online. Before we get to our excellent speakers tonight, a little bit of housekeeping and introduction. So first, what is TransformGov Talks? Well, it's a space for people who care about making government work better. Hopefully that hasn't come as a surprise to you and nobody is running for the door, although actually Derek is heading to the door as I say that, so perhaps he's not here for that. Each event consists of 2 presentations and then a Q&A on how we can make government better. So our speakers have been from a variety of things about doing things differently in government, thinking about things differently, new products, new services, or just new thinking. We are live streaming, as you'll know if we're online, and we are on the record as well. And the series isn't just about data, digital and tech. That is a strong emphasis, and we've been inspired by UK GovCamp and events like that and tried to take that energy through the year, but we're also interested in policy and design and comms, as you see tonight, and all of the other things that go into government. And very importantly, there is one other bullet point, which is free pizza. For those of you in the room, there will be pizza at the end. Apologies to those of you online, we can't quite stretch to sending it to all of you. If you would like to get involved as an organizer, as a speaker, and in fact, all 3 of tonight's speakers came to an event and told us they'd like to speak. So we do listen to people who come and say that they'd like to speak. But if you'd like to help organize, come speak or come sponsor, you can email us transformgovtalks@gmail.com or come and talk to me or anyone in a black t-shirt with a green logo afterwards. We're particularly keen to find some organising help at the moment, as a couple of our committee are leaving us soon. And we're also very conscious that we're male, pale, and quite possibly stale. So the more diverse organising group we get, the better. Got some very good news when it comes to sponsors who are keeping us all in free pizza. Very pleased to announce that Anmut, DXW, Oxford Insights, Public Digital and TPX Impact have agreed to sponsor us for the next 12 months, which is fantastic news. But we're always looking for other people to join. So if you're interested in sponsoring, please do let us know. As I mentioned, this is our 9th event. This is all of the speakers that we've had to date, including the new special advisor to the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. So we now have friends in high places. Moving to tonight, though, this is how tonight's event is going to work. We have got 2 brilliant presentations for you. Each of our presentations will take 25 to 30 minutes each. That includes a presentation and a Q&A afterwards. If you're in the room, you can, of course, put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. If you're in the room or online, you can use Slido. That's slido.com, and the code is 5338014. We'll finish at around 7. There'll be pizza for those of you in the room, and then we will be heading to the pub afterwards as well, and that's the Buckingham Arms. If you're online, you can, of course, try to get to the Buckingham Arms for about 7:30. It'd be lovely to see you. So who are our speakers tonight? Well, first off, we're going to hear from Moira Nicholson and Holly Marquez from the Cabinet Office on failing forward, why planning for AI disasters unlocks breakthrough innovation, all about rolling out a tool to government communications professionals. And that actually gives us a slightly inadvertent comms type theme tonight, because our second speaker will be Ben Sauer. We'll be talking about always be creating clarity, daily habits for strategic storytelling. So 2 slightly different angles on comms and reforming government tonight. Reminder that you can use Slido to ask questions. If you'd like to get on there, you can use the QR code. So I will start to speak slightly more slowly to give you time to scan that. You can go to slido.com and use 5338014 as well. And the last thing before I hand over to our speakers, you can also sign up now for event number 10. That will be on Wednesday, the 29th of October at 6 p.m. back here at the MOJ. One of our speakers will be Ed Humperson, the head of the Office for Statistics Regulation, on why transformation has been so difficult for official statistics. So potentially quite a newsworthy presentation from Ed. That is more than enough from me. My pleasure to introduce our first speakers to the stage, and that's Moira and Holly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Really nice to be here, and I see you all. As has been introduced, my name is Moira. My colleague Holly, we run together the behavioural science team in the Cabinet Office Government Communication Service. And what we're going to talk to you about today is the approach that we've taken to de-risking an AI rollout in government. And obviously, given the theme is about improving government in general, I thought it was worth saying a bit about why I think it's not just applicable to AI, but just in general, what the work that government does. And very briefly, I'll just say that I think one of the things that can happen with government, because it's under a lot of pressure and scrutiny to be innovative and not to be seen as behind the curve when it does things, there's obviously a really big risk that when new things come along, the government makes such an effort to embrace them and to sort of disprove that it can't innovate, that then it might be put it at risk of potentially rolling something out that then has unintended consequences. And I think that that is true for AI as it is true for anything really new or innovative. So it's just thought I'd say that. As mentioned, we are in the behavioural science team. It's also worth saying that we didn't do this on our own. We are part of a wider interdisciplinary team called Applied Data and Insight. And that team included AI engineers who built the tool that we will talk about. And our role really was to look at the human side of the AI rollout. So I just wanted to mention that, yeah, there's a lot of other people working on this as well. I will also now just give you a brief introduction about the tool, because obviously if you aren't in comms, you won't have access to it. So it's just worth knowing a bit about it. Now, Holly, you are going to do that for me, so go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Maura mentioned, our focus on this project has been about supporting in the development and scaling of the tool. The tool is called Assist. It is a bespoke AI tool that's been developed to support government communicators. So as Maura mentioned, we are part of the government communications profession in the sort of professional lead body, and we support over 6,500 government communicators across government organisations. So ranging from departments to ALBs, it's really, really varied, and the types of communicators and the kinds of organisations they're working for are quite different. So essentially, this is a tool to support them in their day-to-day work. This came from a sort of emerging need where communicators said, you know, we're time poor, we need support, we want to leverage this technology, and we want to move the times and not let it take us. Communications is the right place for AI, especially where, you know, generating words is kind of what we do. So it definitely can help. But yeah, just a few points on the tool itself. We're not going to go into a full deep dive, but if you have any questions afterwards, happy to take them. But first, it's built entirely in-house by our own team. This is really rare in government to have the sort of resources or the skills to do that. And really, it came from the fact that we didn't have the resources to outsource it. It's about actually leveraging the skills we had internally. But yeah, this is really rare. We co-developed it with communicators. So basically working with them, scaling it slowly, understanding what works, understanding what wasn't quite working. It's safe and secure, so they can use it with official sensitive information. And it's tailored to evidence around communication best practice. So all of our policies, our frameworks, we're behavioural scientists, we have sort of key guidance we give to communicators about using behavioural science evidence in their work. That's all in there. So essentially the responses are tailored. And just to say, it's essentially used for a whole host of tasks. So it can be used to be drafting communications plans to how we're going to approach, you know, driving blood donations, all the way through to getting feedback on first drafts of communications, and also conducting things like evidence review. So it's really, really varied, used for a lot of things, but it's essentially tailored to communications as a discipline. And before we talk a bit more about the work we've actually done, we thought it'd be useful to show you some of the sort of outcomes we've got so far. Now, we're quite open as a team to say that, you know, it's a work in progress. We're constantly moving forward, learning, adapting, and the tool evolves as we do, and as AI does too. But in less than a year since Assist's sort of full cross-government launch, it's now being used by 232 organisations across government. 96% of all government communicators, so these are everybody who counts themselves as a communicator, are now on board onto the tool. To do that, they have to undertake mandatory training. Getting 96% of people to do mandatory training is an achievement. It's one I think we all pat ourselves on the back for. But that's not enough, obviously. It's not just about actually doing the training and getting access, but actually using it regularly, using it well, which is what we'll speak about a bit today. So a bit more information on the slide there about the actual usage. But yeah, we'll leave it there and then move on to the next part.
So yeah, there was like essentially 3 phases of work that we ran with the technical side of the team. So that's the team that are building the tool. One was about getting people to adopt the tool, and then the other was about getting people to embed the tool in their workflows. And then the third was what we called the optimization, which goes hand in hand with de-risking. So a tool that doesn't lead to any backfire effects is a good tool and a better tool. And it's that third bit that I'm going to talk about today. So basically AI safety, huge field. When the public talk about AI safety, they think about deep fakes, they might think about, the disruption of labor markets. This is a robot ice cream dispenser and robot armies, right, from sci-fi. When government talks about AI safety risk, this is from our personal experience, they might be talking about algorithm bias, and they certainly are talking about data breaches, like so the risk of data breaches, the risk of sensitive information then going into the hands of people that shouldn't have access to it. But we were really interested in what we call the hidden risks of AI, which are the unintended consequences of AI adoption that are less salient or which remain invisible until they escalate into obvious problems or crises. And it was these hidden risks that we were wanting to elicit and mitigate before they happen. And we were drawing on a kind of well-established literature from other fields that looked at the interaction between humans and technology. So human-computer interaction is a well-developed field. So you might be familiar, if anyone's read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, there's a really, really good chapter in that book about aviation accidents and what causes those accidents, and in particular, what the number of accidents that are attributed to human error, or some people will call it human factors. The majority, there's only so much you can improve a technology, and once you've improved the technology, then the remaining accidents are going to be down to pilots, are they able to communicate effectively, are they overly tired, do they have a psychologically safe culture to raise concerns, etc. And then of course the other area is medical mistakes. So
radiology being one example.
Yeah, exactly. So misinterpretation of images by radiologists account for 60 to 70% of errors estimated, right? And that's not to blame, it's important to say, it's not to blame the medical professionals, but it's just to say that, there might be system factors, tiredness, fatigue, not enough training, etc., that might lead to that mistake happening. And the other thing that we were really interested in talking about, particularly in our team, is that we felt as behavioral scientists that it was very obvious to us that the current approaches to AI safety were not going to be effective, like glaringly obvious. So one approach was to basically de-risk the AI tool itself, so using technical measures, so technical guardrails, fine-tuning to human preferences. The problem is that a lot of errors can't be designed out technically, because a lot of errors will occur due to the interaction between the individual human being and the technology. So, and this is still a huge problem, I think. Like, I don't think in the year that we've been working on this, that this problem has been solved. I think people have recognized the adoption challenge, which we worked on, but this has not been well recognized. Second is, you might have heard of human in the loop as a safety control. The problem is that we know from lots of research that people are not necessarily good overseers of algorithmic decisions. So there's been studies in particular, interesting being here at MOJ, of judges in the US looking at making a bail decision. So should we give this person bail or not? And what you find is people will override the algorithmic recommendation when they shouldn't have, or go with it when they shouldn't have. So in other words, it's not, and that's again not to blame the judges, but it's just that, if you're overseeing the algorithm, the same problems in decision making that would occur without the algorithm then occur with it, right? The third approach that's been used is to assign risk ownership to the users, and often these are actually used in combination, they're not used individually. So that might just say, use this, you're responsible for the outputs, you're responsible for checking them. But of course, I call this the may contain nuts approach, as a nut allergy sufferer, you know, you read everything in the pack. This may contain nuts. Not very useful. Like, I just need to read the ingredients. You know, it's basically saying, I'm not going to take responsibility. You're responsible for it. And as we know from like lots and lots of research, it's rare that accidents happen as a result of the action of one single individual. It's normally a systems issue.
And also, just to add as well, a key point with this is that it's not that any of these alone, like you'll see these as fundamental aspects of any kind of AI data governance strategy, and that's fine. It's saying that you can't just have these alone. There's layers to it, and there's problems and issues and challenges that these alone won't address, and that you need other things to help support them as effective mechanisms.
Yeah, exactly. So to prevent risk holistically, you have to understand the mechanisms that lead to the risk materializing, and fundamentally that's basically the decisions and actions that the people that are using these tools take. So let's say, you know, risk becomes possible from the limitations or impacts of an AI solution, let's say algorithm bias, right? And then people and teams interact with AI in quite mundane, everyday ways, which make those risks more likely. So, for example, let's say you're working in HR and you're using an AI tool to help you sift lots and lots of applications. Now, let's say you trust that AI to do that job effectively. You don't then have someone else QAing it. And as a result of that decision, if that's multiplied across a labour market, across many organisations, that is what then leads to the risk that we talk about, which is the unfair labour market outcomes. But if you want to stop the unfair labour market outcomes, which is what would be considered the macro expression of this problem, you have to look at the micro, which are the individual steps that lead to that risk materialising. So you have to break it down. So that's essentially what we did. We basically wanted to crack open the black box to anticipate the behavioural mechanisms of AI risk. And there wasn't a framework that currently existed to allow us to do this. There were frameworks used in the aviation sector, which, you know, where they've really had to contend with this, but it hasn't really been done in AI, I guess, because it's still relatively new in terms of the mass use of, for instance, large language models. So we created the framework based on, I won't go into the detail, but using a random subsample of prompts that were fed into our tool. We were able to analyze that data and go, if this tool were used for this purpose, how could that go wrong? And then through that, we were able to create an overarching set of categories, here 6 categories of the things that could go wrong. So one is quality assurance, not that surprising. Everyone's talked about, have you checked the output? Has it hallucinated? Task tool mismatches. Have you used the tool for the job it's good at? So don't use it to do maths, right? And although that might evolve over time, perceptions and emotional signaling. So how do people feel when they know that AI is going to be rolled out in the organization? Do they feel threatened? If they feel threatened, that might reduce uptake. If that reduces uptake, you might lose out on the potential benefits that AI can bring. Organizational challenges associated with adopting AI. It's actually been a study that came out recently that demonstrated something we hypothesized with this framework a year ago, which is that when you adopt a new way of working, you would expect to see a reduction in productivity initially, as people have to actually adapt to doing something in a new way. In theory, it should then increase, but obviously that's more of an empirical question. But this was something we anticipated. Ethics is on there, but at the minute, what's interesting about this, ethics is pretty much the main thing you hear about when it comes to AI safety. Oh, we have an ethicist, we have a philosopher, have someone looking at the ethics. But that is just one category of risks that can occur. There are many risks that can arise that aren't really to do with ethics as such, although you might say it's unethical to allow certain risks to materialize. And then human connection and technological over-reliance, more relevant really, not so much in our tool, but if it's a public-facing tool, where you might be replacing, say, a face-to-face or telephone interaction with a human with, say, a chatbot. It could be that the human interaction was providing other benefits that weren't being measured as part of the purpose of the interaction. Holly, you always give the example of GP receptionists.
Yeah, so several years ago, during the pandemic, actually, I was doing my research masters and I worked part-time at a GP surgery, and I was a receptionist, and everybody hates those people. But I can tell you why. It's because they go through the brunt of it. And I don't think anybody really realizes until you're in those kinds of front front-facing positions, that they play a really critical role, and there's anecdotal evidence around the fact that, you know, especially, for example, people who are particularly at risk or people who are a bit older and don't have people at home, those are the key avenues for you to learn more about where they're at risk, where, oh, they've called a few times recently, oh, and they mentioned this, we should send the doctor over. There are really key touch points, and if you miss that by automating, you miss, and you can create unintended consequences, such as people not getting the help they need, such as people dying in those contexts. But that's a very obviously extreme example. But it shows the importance of understanding that risk, so you can mitigate it. To go, okay, for the people who that's less likely to be the case, we could potentially support them in taking up a digital route because they might be more comfortable with that. For people who are really at risk, how can we actually mitigate that and give them the support they need? This approach is not about, you know, labeling everything as bad and you shouldn't use AI. It's about going, how could it go wrong so we can make it go right? How can we identify these risks up front so we can mitigate it through the way in which we're designing this into the way we work and the way we live?
Yeah, handing over to you now, Holly, for the rest.
Oh, fabulous. So absolutely. So Moira's given a walkthrough about the different categories of risks. Now, what does this look like in practice? This is also very sort of high level and themed up. So what we wanted to do is, in the process of doing this ourselves for our own AI rollout with Assist, we identified, you know, about 130 hypothetical risks that we could then work with our team to go, okay, what do we think is likely to occur? What would be a really big problem? And then start to prioritize them. But what we realized is that, you know, if any of you are working on AI rollouts or you're getting access to an AI tool in your work, the risks can be completely different depending on your context. So it wasn't useful for us to give you a list of risks. It's useful of actual physical risks. It's useful to have a guiding process. So what we did is essentially developed a toolkit with prompt questions to help people involved in rolling out AI tools to think through the risks themselves for their own rollouts, for their context, for their specific AI tool, for their specific use cases. So, for example, for each of those different risk themes, we created prompt questions. For example, quality assurance, you know, are there likely to be time pressures which hinder people's ability for them to quality assure outputs? Now, as Moira mentioned, quality assurance isn't just, is it correct? It's also, is it good? I often say, like, you know, I am quite knowledgeable about the psychological underpinnings of mis and disinformation. You give me an AI-generated literature review on that, I can quality assure it, no problem. I know nothing about physics. You give me anything on that, I'd be like, that looks brilliant. Wow, fantastic. So it's a really key point. It's not just about accuracy, it's actually about quality. And if we have a proliferation of content that is accurate but not good, that's not great, is it? Another example could be about, you know, could people use the tools for purposes it wasn't designed for or actually good at? You know, is it actually tailored to that? We see that a lot with like different models. So different models are optimized for different tasks, and, you know, people are not switching between them. That could be a risk. You know, what emotional responses could we get from rolling out a tool, and what consequences could it be? Could it be, as Moira mentioned, that people actually shun your AI rollout? What implications could that have for your organization and the impact it could have? Are there any ways in which the tool could reduce job satisfaction and motivation? Lots of people are assuming that it will increase it, and that's absolutely fine, but we need to be measuring these things. You need to actually understand what that looks like, and that's not always a survey. Sometimes it's actually having a conversation with people in your team and your colleagues. And the use of the tool impact public trust in your organization. This is something that we've spoken a lot, you know, and it's really important as government communicators, really clear and giving people the support they need to say, you know, this is how we're using it responsibly. This is why we're doing talks like this, coming out and publicly talking about the way in which we're taking an ethical and evidence-based approach, mitigating the risks, and being really clear about that. And then finally, with human connection and technological reliance, you know, some examples there being, you know, could the use of the tool result in a loss of skills? So we've seen some evidence recently around, you know, skills erosion, cognitive decline. We know that, you know, if you don't work your brain, sometimes that can have limitations and consequences. So, you know, which of those are we willing, what's the trade-offs and what are we willing to accept? You know, I help care for my 3 nieces and nephew, and they come home from school with maths times tables, and they're 7. And I'm genuinely overwhelmed. It's because I haven't had to flex my brain on times tables for many years now. I just use the calculator. But, you know, we still teach maths at school because it's an important skill to have if our phone dies or we don't have a calculator to hand. So it's really critical we think about these things through. So I'm just going to run through probably one example just to give you a bit of flavour of what this looks like in practice and these risks and the kinds of things we kind of surface, mindful of a bit of time. So what do you think? Quality assurance?
Yeah, show the next one maybe.
Yeah, we'll give you quality assurance is easy. Everyone gets that one. So one example would be for workflow and organizational challenges. So take Robert. Robert is the head of a team, and his team is facing pressure to reduce budgets and save money. Robert decides to not backfill 3 roles of people who've left on the assumption that, oh, well, AI is driving efficiencies. I've been told this from my senior leadership team. This seems like a reasonable assumption to make. I'm going to not backfill these roles. My team can cope, and they've been saying that it's been really good for the rollout. The consequence is that team members might feel, if they're not in a psychologically safe environment, where they can trust and be open with their team lead, they might feel they can't safely challenge it. It can lead to burnout because they're taking on more work that they don't actually have the resource to do. It can lead to inefficiencies and impact delivery in reality. It can even lead to people taking more time off sick. So it's not always the route, and it's about measuring and being clear on that so we can actually unpick that. And you can see at the bottom it says, what could Robert, his team and his organisation do to prevent these risks up front? So what training could we give Robert? What organisational policies could we set from the top about the approach to take with rolling out AI? How are we using the efficiency gains that AI might deliver? Is it to reduce costs? Is it to do more? These are the kinds of questions you could be asking in the process. So I'm just going to give you one example of what this looks like in practice, in the sense of, okay, Holly and Moira, you've walked us through this framework, you've identified these 6 categories of AI risks and explained how these could be serviced for different rollouts. What does that mean in practice for actually making changes and mitigating them before they occur? So for us, one example of that is that when we did this mapping, several of the risks we identified were around the real impact of low AI literacy. People fundamentally, generally don't really understand how AI works, the fact that prediction underpins it, and the risks involved in that, particularly for specific use cases that we were looking at. What we noticed from looking at these in a bit more depth was that managers and leaders were really key players in those decisions. So, quality assuring, providing steer about what it should and shouldn't be used for, giving permission to go and do training, things like that. So what we did, amongst other things, this is just one example of one thing we did, is went on and delivered manager and leadership specific webinar training and bespoke support, focused on upskilling them and giving them the support they needed to be responsible advocates, because nobody wants to be an irresponsible advocate, right? And so that's just one sort of taster of what that looked like. Happy in the Q&A to answer any other questions about the other things we did. And I'll pass back to Moira, the last bit.
Yeah, so I think the other thing that we learned from doing this is that how important it is to be interdisciplinary. I mean, people say this all the time, but then I think it's you sort of like point out what disciplines are useful for what things. So it's really common in tech rollouts to have user researchers, and definitely user research can help us to understand people's attitudes, perceptions, and experiences of using the tool. So like, how does the graphical interface look? Should we have a box here or there? Like, how many steps does it take for someone to get from the login page through to actually using the tool? What else can we do to make the tool user friendly? But you then need to have other people involved to look at how are you embedding this within the organization? What are the workflow and organizational challenges that you're going to face? And for that, you kind of need social and behavioral scientists, maybe change managers, and then of course you might also want to look at the sociologists. The research methods used there, thinking about how can we understand the wider societal factors and the impact of AI adoption in organizations, right? So I think this is hopefully quite useful to see, what skills you need for like what aspects of the challenge. All of this is published on gov.uk. So we've got our practical framework for scaling, which has our adopt, sustain, optimize framework. So boosting adoption, boosting embedding, and then also our toolkit for de-risking. So yeah, all of that is available online for you to have a look at. And yeah, also just to say, we really welcome feedback on that. So please go through, dig in, and send us an email with any thoughts you have on it, good, bad, the ugly. We really support, and sort of it's a continuing project. It never really ends. It's about sort of doing this together. And are we taking questions now, or do we go straight over? Okay.
Absolutely. It's like any more information.
Brilliant, thank you. Any questions? And if you could keep them nice and crisp, we'll get through a few more. Excellent. We'll start with you over here. Do tell us who you are and where you're from if you can. We are on the record.
Hi, I'm Katie Beale from Westminster City Council. Really great presentation. I'm really interested to hear what feedback you've had so far from those toolkits you've created and how teams have found them useful or where they've said things need to change.
Yeah, good question. So when we launched them, we definitely had feedback saying, oh, it's really good that someone is talking about the fact that not everyone's adopting AI. And the one big thing that we got was that we were to publish our adoption rate, which at the time I think was like, was it 70% or something?
It was around that. It was lower than, yeah.
Yeah, people were really glad to just hear like, yeah, like actually it's okay to say that this isn't an overnight transformation and that it's all right if you don't have, I mean, that's, when I say adoption, that's just literally people logging in. And then we have this kind of downward curve of like regular usage, that makes sense, which again is normal. So that's, I think, the biggest feedback, right, that we got was that people were kind of happy to sort of go, oh yeah, thankfully someone's saying that this isn't just an overnight transformation, it's going to take time and that actually we need help. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, can I have your mic?
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like I'm a TikTok influencer. I don't have TikTok, but I think this is what they do. Yeah, I think also one of the most practical pieces of feedback we've gotten has been about the fact that in the guides, we use case studies from our own rollouts to try and make it really tangible. From our experience, being completely honest, a lot of the other kinds of resources similar, and maybe not the same topic, but similar kind of thing, sometimes don't feel tangible or practical. Now, it's not perfect, it's very long, but I think it's about the fact that being able to see what that looks like and have transparency and like the steps be outlined really clearly. That's the feedback we've gotten about people so far. And what we're looking for sort of longer term, there's already a few teams we're working with to embed the process, so across government. So basically working with them to conduct, or they give us feedback on how they found conducting the hidden risks analysis and things like that. But if anybody else, if you're working in spaces where you think this is useful, we really welcome it, because what we want to do is not just, demonstrate the value and impact it's had, but also build on it. If there's ways it can improve, if there's new risks that emerge, we want to incorporate it, we want to think about that. So you're really open to constructive feedback on it too, as well as any sort of collaboration.
Great, thank you. Any more questions in the room? I will take both of you briefly, and I will plug Ben's computer in while you're answering those. So excuse me while I do that.
Hi, Victoria from MOJ. I was wondering, when you were developing this, if you'd worked at all with companies outside of government, like AI companies, like that, and what kind of feedback you got from that? Because obviously this is a problem that basically everyone is facing right now, and everyone can work together to a solution.
Yeah,
We'll take the second one as well.
yeah, well, so we didn't, oh, we're doing, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Well, back to back. My name is Olivia and I'm from GDS. My question is just, do you have any tips or practical learnings from working on this cross-disciplinary team? I feel like government, for as well-intentioned as it is, isn't always great at cross-disciplinary teams. Is there anything that you learned by working on this sort of like behavioral science with tech colleagues, digital colleagues in this space on this project?
Good questions. I'll answer briefly. So on the first one, did we work with AI companies? We worked with the Alan Turing Institute, and we engaged a lot with academic experts. We did get some feedback from Meta on the guides, saying that they obviously endorse the rollout of AI and welcome any guidance on that helps organizations to adopt it. But we haven't actually, we haven't worked directly with AI organizations on the de-risking element. I think that's part of what motivated us to publish this, is to sort of raise the question about whether or not going beyond just working with ethicists would be a good idea, which we think it would be. So I do think it would be good for organizations to consider that interdisciplinary working. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. All right. And then your question was on, remind me,
Interdisciplinary working and the tips around it. I was just going to add something as well to the first question, just to say, yeah, I think that was one thing we were really worried about, was doing identifying the risk and categorizing them. What we didn't want to do is create a framework for our problem and not other people's. So I think although it wasn't working with AI companies, yeah, collaboration was at the heart. We engaged about 50 stakeholders across both government, outside of government, private sector organizations, and academia. I would say we did quite a lot, but it was to try and make it future-proof-ish, but also relevant for other people. Because what we did, yeah, like I said, we didn't want to create something that was only useful for us and not for anyone else. Otherwise, it'd be a waste of time. On the second question, tips. We're really lucky that we by nature are in a multidisciplinary team. As I mentioned, just the makeup of our team is just by nature that way, and we work quite closely. I'm trying to think.
To be honest, I would say the biggest issue is making the case for the team. So we were already in one, but I think the biggest challenge is making the case for them. My big tip would be that we need to do so much more to help people in government understand what different disciplines offer, what problems they can help to solve as a basic starting point. Because I think that's one thing like that I don't think is fully grasped, is like there are different disciplines. I mean disciplines beyond policy, comms and operations. I mean like, you know, economics, psychology, sociology, anthropology, that they all offer a different lens. And I don't think that's fully appreciated, including with data, right? Data is seen as graphs, quantitative, but there's actually a huge amount of value in qualitative. So that would be the first place I would start to then make the case for then the different multidisciplinary teams.
Fantastic. Well, Moira, Holly, thank you very much indeed.
Hello, everybody. I really want to talk to you about your work because I'm going to talk about communication internally. So I'm really fascinated to know how the AI is helping some of your folks internally communicate. Anyway, so my name is Ben Sauer. I am an author, a speaker, a coach, and I've been training various civic and gov teams in communication recently. And that's because I used to work at an organization that had really high standards for communication. And when I started to run teams in other organizations, I realized I had a bit of a bee in my bonnet about it. And I even wrote a book at some point. So what am I going to talk about today? It's really kind of captured well in this quote. Is anyone familiar with this possibly apocryphal quote? The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. We often overestimate the degree to which we have been understood by others. And that is particularly a problem for us when we are creating transformation and trying to introduce new ideas. And, you know, obviously transformation is often powered by the story behind it. You only need to look at what's happening in the country at the moment to understand what's going on there. And I want to bring you some very practical ideas today, not a lot of theory, about how we can get better at communication. Because one of my working theories when I wrote my book was you don't need a literature degree, you don't need a PhD in storytelling to get better at this. And I'm going to start with a scene from my favorite movie. And this is going to be awkward because I have to switch around. Google Meet doesn't let me share videos. Who has seen this movie? A few. Okay, well, I still need to set it up for those who haven't seen it. In this movie by Denis Villeneuve, aliens land on Earth. That's their spaceship. It's all very serious. And the top linguist in the world, her name is Louise, is given the job of figuring out how to communicate with the aliens. And she goes into their ship, so that thing in the background. And at first she starts trying to talk to the aliens, but they make weird noises. No one really understands what's actually going on. There's no translation at all. And then eventually she kind of improvises and she starts trying to write, share writing with the aliens. And they start writing back in their unusual script. And the rest of the movie is really about translating their written language. Anyway, when she does this, she's getting somewhere, but she comes out of the spacecraft and military bosses in charge of this whole thing are super unhappy about it. And this is what happens next. And unfortunately, I have to switch over. This is all super awkward. Apologies. Let me just share the right screen. Google does not let me do that. Here we go. 1 second. Okay, here we go. I hope everyone can hear this. Please let me know if not. Subtitles if not. No. I'm not going to bother. It'll totally mess it up. Can everyone online hear it? Please let us know. You got the audio? Dave? No. Okay, I'm going to try and share the audio. Oh, yeah, okay. So much worse without the audio. Yeah, I'll start it again, and I'm going to try and share the audio this time. Give me 1 second here. Sorry, everyone. So, let me try one more time. Try again. Okay. This is going to get silly now. Let me just stop sharing. And switch my audio. So, what I want you to notice in that scene is the fact that Louise is an academic. How would an academic normally talk about the fact that it is easier to share writing than it is to learn how to speak a different language? She knew exactly what story to tell in less than a second. And so really, what my talk today is about is how can we be more like Louise, right? If we practice our communication habits, we will know exactly what story to tell, even in the moment, even in conversation. And of course, stories beat facts. She could have gone through the whole process of explaining the theory. She didn't need to do that. And when we find the right story, the perfect metaphor, it unlocks understanding in a way that going straight to the facts often does not. And what we often do is we resort to info dumping. We've all seen some version of this. I'm a designer. Very frequently, we would do what my friend Jane Austen, not that Jane Austen, she's a design leader, she calls the real estate tour, right? Where a designer takes the stakeholders or their team through every single piece of the interface, every screen, and it becomes like a shopping list. So I just wanted to show you around the new website. This is the new homepage. I know it's got loads of stuff on it, but hey, we had to please all stakeholders. Don't look down here. It's just, you know, the footer, help and support, contact us. Things users don't really care about. Anyway, you get my point, right? Often it becomes a shopping list when we share information. And the reason that's a problem is that often bad communication is like a product with too many features, right? It kind of undermines what it is useful for, what you are trying to get across. And what you should be saying is actually far smaller than what you could say, but we resort to the facts and the shopping list. And the secondary problem is that we are not our own audience when we talk about our work. Usually when we work on a piece of software, for example, it is everything we're thinking about, right? It's for weeks or even months, it's our entire universe, our entire North Star. But for everybody else, it's one of 50 things they're dealing with that day. Now, you might think, Ben, you're going to tell me how to get, put more effort into my communication. And yes, I am today. I'm sorry. I am going to tell you to do that. But we often assume that that is for everybody else when we're trying to transform our organizations. I would actually argue, oh, is it stop sharing? Wow. I'm really in for it today. This is really smooth. Now I'm really regretting using my own laptop. Sorry, everyone. So when we think of putting more effort into our communication, we often think, oh, that's for everybody else. But the truth is that actually really great communication is a selfish thing. Why do I say that? Because how you talk about the thing, it shapes the thing. You improve your ideas by improving your communication about a thing. We tend to think of the work as separate from our communication. I don't really think it is. So how do we tell clearer stories and get our ideas and our transformation ambitions into people's heads? Well, one of the main things I say is that I learned it because I was at an organization where you were expected to be a great public speaker, right? And we're often not in the situation that forces us to think that hard about our communication. But being on stage around the world is what forced me to take it really, really seriously. So the thing I'm asking you really today is, can you spend an extra 10 minutes, 10% of your time really crafting really great communication about your ideas? Because it's a very high leverage thing to do. And just pretend that you're speaking to a large group of unfamiliar stakeholders, for example. That's one way you can do it. Now, the ideas I'm going to share with you today are from my book. I'm not going to talk about it very much. But it really is the idea that a few of these things that I'm going to share with you today can add up to clarity if you practice them often. And the first one I'm going to share with you is outlining horizontally. Now, this is really simple and dumb, but it has a really useful effect on how we communicate. So I don't know about you, but I find myself constantly outlining things, messages, reports, presentations, user journeys, even, when I'm in design mode. And often the tools that we use will often push us to do that in a vertical fashion, right? Think of Notion or whatever Microsoft tool you particularly like to use. And this actually hides something really useful from us. And we should be outlining horizontally when we're thinking about our communication, because what it actually does is it helps us see the shape of our communication, right? The ups and the downs of what we're saying. And it also provides some useful constraints. So if you're communicating something, this is a way to sort of constrain it a bit, right? It stops you from going on too long. There's the info dumping again. And this is similar to creating a user journey map. That's no accident. We're crafting the communication to make it an experience for the people that we're trying to talk to. So that's the first tip. Very simple and dumb. But use Miro or whatever tool you like to outline horizontally. It really has a very kind of unconscious effect on how you communicate. So, strong story glue. Now, if you know any storytelling professionals, you might know that they're obsessed with things like the hero's journey. I'm not going to talk about any of that theory today. I just want to talk about one really useful idea. When we focus on our communication, we tend to focus on the content, right? The stuff that's in there. And the sections, the content make up all of our thoughts. But there's this other thing going on, which is what holds it together? What are the spaces in between the things we're trying to get across? So Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the creators of South Park, they have this very useful rule. A weak story is a series of and then, and then, and then, and then. There's the info dumping again. However, a strong story is connected with words like this. Therefore, so, but, however, right? there is an implicit logic behind the story you are telling. And just by using these words or seeing if you've got them or if you're telling an and then story, you will immediately see whether somebody is going to follow what you're saying. Let's have a look at an example from Jeff Goffel, designer. I graduated and then I joined the circus and then I met the human cannibal and then he told me how he got his job. Okay, kind of an interesting life story, but let's have a look at how he rewrote it. I graduated with no plan, so I joined the circus. Therefore, I met some crazy characters like the human cannibal, but his story was nothing like I imagined. And that's a much better version of the story. It forced him to change the content, and it often forces you to change the order of what you're saying. So, you can use therefore, so, but, however, not, and then when you're outlining. If you use this as just a very quick method of assessing your communication, you'll find that the stories you're telling, the ideas you're trying to get across are much stronger in people's minds. So that's strong story glue. Now, transcribing yourself. Just have a thought for a moment about improv, right? And how in improv, there's a feedback loop, right? You make something up if you're practicing it, and you learn to be funnier because you're very quickly getting feedback from the audience in kind of nanoseconds sometimes about whether you're funny. And we improvise every day, but that feedback's not so clear, especially in British culture, because we are a very polite nation. We like to nod along and pretend we're in agreement or, you know, understanding things, right? My family are actually Dutch. It is very, very different. So when we're often sharing ideas, we get this kind of politeness. Yeah, okay, great. But one alternative way, instead of actually having to do that awkward thing of asking people, is just to transcribe yourself now and again. And of course, meeting tools will do this for us. Now, how many of you actually read back a transcript of what you said in the meeting? I'm getting a few nods here. We've lost it again. Oh my goodness. I don't know what is going on here. The tools have it in for me today. I'm sorry, folks, and I know this is taking us over time. Apologies to the organisers. Okay. I'll try again. So what we're doing when we transcribe ourselves and read it back is we're creating a feedback loop between the way we speak and the way we write. And that is how really great communicators do it, comedians, presenters, and so on. Now, it would be remiss of me not to mention AI tools today. This is one of my favorites, RambleFix. You talk into it. I don't know whether this is allowed in your field, but you can talk into it and it gives you a clearer version back of what you're saying, which is really useful. But a word of warning. What I've been telling people in my training is don't use this as a ghostwriter, right? Use it as a writing coach, as a reflection tool. Because the problem with using it as a ghostwriter, having it do all communicating for you, is that you are not becoming a better communicator through that process. So, transcribe yourself occasionally, have a look back. Maybe you'll find you could say something in 10 words rather than 100. Okay, craft great headlines. I love this sentence from this summary from Tanner Christensen at Netflix. He said, when first designing something, getting caught up in the details is easy. But once you try explaining yourself to somebody else, you must distill down what's essential and how everything kind of fits together to make sense of it. So this is really what a journalist does, right? Writing concisely and getting lost in the details and then figuring out, okay, what is that one thing that summarizes the whole thing? So if you want to create clarity in your organization constantly, think about the headline summaries you're crafting and spend almost as much time crafting those as you do on the communication itself. And I like this idea that writing is the antidote to confusion. Again, it's not a separate thing. It's kind of how we think. Here's an example weirdly connected to what you talked about from my book. This is a food startup, a food delivery startup that did some user research and writing headlines about the work. So research finding number one, this is something you see often, right, in reports and presentations, just these kind of generic placeholders. That's fine when you're outlining, but we're not communicating anything. So let's go to the next level, allergies, food allergies when you're ordering food. Okay, This is the category. You see this a lot in books, right? Just the category. But actually, you're not really saying anything yet. So this version emerged out of me transcribing myself. Users with allergies face difficult life and death choices. Okay, let's get a bit more poetic with this. This took me an extra 15 minutes to get to. Allergic food choice is a life or death lottery. Now we're really optimizing people's understanding. It's much more compelling, much more memorable. There are 3 rhetorical devices in that sentence. Anybody know what they are? Or classic students, literature students? Anyone? Metaphor, I heard someone say. Yes, correct. Lottery. Anyone else? Okay, we've got hyperbole. I focused on the life and death version of allergies. Absolutely true, but we've zoomed in on the most extreme version of a food allergy. The last one, of course, is alliteration, right? The double L. So very quickly, using a couple of patterns, we've made a much more memorable sentence. Now you might think, okay, what we're aiming towards is in the moment understanding, but we're not. What we really want is for people to take away and use the words that we crafted with other people. Because, folks, I'm sure you've all felt this, success is having stakeholders repeat your ideas back to you. That's why adding a bit of poetry and a bit of rhetoric to the summaries of our work or the summaries of what we're trying to say is so helpful. And as I mentioned, the tools of rhetoric are ancient, they are patterns, and we can use them very, very easy. This is one of my favorites, parallelism. You take a word or a concept in a sentence and repeat it. Nike's really good at this. Work hard, play harder, right? Give a word with a double meaning 2 different ways of doing it. Now, you don't have to be writing tabloid-style headlines or, advertising headlines to find this useful. Actually, these methods are really, really useful, even if you're writing much plainer, more day-to-day sentences. Okay, so that's great headlines. Make sure they're 7 to 10 words at most. Attention grabbers, what are those? Well, you noticed in my messing around with video sharing and sound sharing that I played you a scene from the movie. Well, if you want people's attention and understanding, it's actually often much better to frame what you are doing with another story, if you like, a story that introduces your story. This is the main way I deliver talks around the world. And this is what I did today. And movies are great at this. Their first scene is often something like this. Cult member performs insane stunt for reals, right? Every Mission Impossible movie is a big, dumb stunt. And the crazy thing about them is we know Tom is doing it for real. Fun fact about how they write these movies, Tom decides what stunts he wants to do, then they write the plot around it. Let's have a look at a slightly more interesting example than a big, dumb action movie. Yeah. Oh, man, I'm really losing today. Okay, the original Jurassic Park. Put your hand up if you saw it in the cinema. Oh, you're all too young. I'm showing my age now. So the original Jurassic Park opens with a scene where they're moving a dinosaur in a cage, and the cage door gets jammed open, and one of the zookeepers is actually dragged in and eaten alive. It's a really horrifying scene for a family movie, by the way. So what is Spielberg doing here? He's introducing the theme of Jurassic Park. Folks, what is the theme of Jurassic Park? That's the plot. That's not the theme. Again, plot stuff. What's the theme? Yeah, science what? Technology is scary, but what's huh? Science fiction? That's the genre. Ding, ding, ding. Book for you, madam. There's a copy of my book. Don't play God. Think Jeff Goldblum reclining, slightly sweaty. He talks about how the scientists didn't think about whether they should. They were just thinking about whether they could. So this scene is a warning into the theme of Jurassic Park. It's a microscopic version of the whole idea. So these attention-grabbing stories that movies are really good at, they'll often surprise us. They will often be provocative, change, sort of, poke us a little bit on what we're thinking. But most importantly, thematic relevance to what we are going to say later. Now, I've talked about movies. Let's talk about products and services. Who knows what that is? Again, showing my age. Now, if you don't know, Sony revolutionized how we listen to music with the Walkman in the late 70s. And then in the 80s, they decided to add a bit of color and style to their product range. And they ran focus groups. They got people into a room and they showed them these new designs. And people loved these new yellow Walkmans and these colorful models. But the focus group was not the real research. When people left the session, they were asked to take home a reward. They could take home a black one or a yellow one. Folks, which one did most people take home? The black one, indeed. So I've just told you a little micro story, an attention grabber. What were the themes? I would normally Q&A this, but let's just explore some of the themes. The value of research, right? Just doing research about your service. Experiment design, that's kind of a really interesting experiment to do, the way that they weren't actually interested in what people said. But of course, it highlights the difference between what people say and do. And you might also frame this as like risk reduction in our product development process. So when we use these stories, we've got a story in mind, there's a theme behind that story, and then there's some sort of use for the attention-grabbing story, right? We want to warn amateur biohackers not to do that. So that's that way round. What I do in my workshops is we go the other way. You have something you're trying to communicate. What framing story, what attention-grabbing story would be most useful to tell to make everybody understand what you're talking about? So I also say collect attention grabbers here, because I've actually started collecting them in my career. What are the useful framing stories that you've learned in your work in government, in your previous jobs, at conferences, and so on and so on. So next one, mindful metaphors. Every language has phrases, concepts, ideas that it doesn't share with others. This is my favorite in German. Kammerspeck. Anybody know what this is? Do we have any Germans in the room? No? I say Kammerspeck literally is sorrow bacon. And what they're referring to is an emotional state when you've had a really stressful week and you buy a tub of Haagen-Dazs on the way home and eat the whole thing. Okay, so like emotional eating, right? And I love that they have a really interesting metaphor for it. Now, you may know from the academic work that's out there that actually there is this idea that metaphors are how we navigate the world. This idea comes from Lakoff and Johnson, and they even propose that human thought processes are unconsciously guided by metaphors. And the thing that's relevant about this to us is that we use metaphors to navigate new technologies, right? We use comparison to navigate, let's say, a new communication platform. What was that like, right? Introducing that idea to people. And this happens throughout the history of technology. This is one of my favorite historical examples. The horsey horseless from the Victorian era. Why the creators thought to put a horse's head on it is anyone's guess. We've lost it again. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, everybody online. I don't know what's wrong. Just give me 1 second to share it again, because it is a really funny image. Here we go again. Hopefully that's the last time, because I'm nearly done. Sorry, folks. So the horsey horseless, right? Maybe they were thinking, well, it's got to look like a horse-drawn carriage if it's going to be traveling down the street. Or maybe they thought they would scare other horses with it or something. Anyway, so you might think, well, we don't make silly mistakes like that anymore in technology. Oh, yes, we do. What are the prevailing metaphors and imagery that are associated with AI today? You didn't use any of it, don't worry. It's stuff like this. Okay? This is really backwards facing and super problematic. It's basically a callback to Fritz Lang's Metropolis for the most part. Why on earth we are framing AI and the use of it as sort of sexy robots, I don't really understand. The sexism is really the worst part of it here. But it's completely inappropriate. And you could kind of argue that we don't really understand AI until we've developed a better metaphor for it. But what do metaphors do? Well, they help us understand a new thing via some property, right? Protection, in this case, antivirus software. And then you get to relate it to it via something that people are already familiar with. And really great service design thinkers are really good at this. Stuart Butterfield, who created Slack, banned the word chat because he thought if they use the word chat as a metaphor while they're designing and creating that service, it won't allow them to revolutionize how we communicate. So avoiding bad ones is really, really useful. And, you know, we want to replace those with better metaphors when we're introducing new ideas. This is a really dumb example that I wrote, just to show you what I mean. Every organization I talk to is creating some sort of AI-powered help bot at the moment. So how would you explain that to somebody that doesn't know how an LLM works? Finding help today is like trying to find the right book in a library with randomized bookshelves. And new AI is like a super speedy librarian. They'll find things for you. So we framed the problem with a metaphor and the solution. That's much faster understanding for most people in terms of what it does. I like to create little competitions with finding metaphors. In fact, come to my workshops. We actually go outside and actually play like a treasure hunt for metaphors. Really fun. Okay, so I talked a lot about these methods that I shared with you today. But going back to Louise in Arrival, how do you sort of connect the dots on command, right? It's one thing to plan your communication and craft a presentation or a piece of comms. It's another to sort of use this stuff in the moment. Well, the reason I talked about all these habits today is because we need to make reframing habitual, okay? We need to be constantly thinking, what's a better way of explaining this to somebody who has no idea what I'm talking about? And in government, this is incredibly important because the government teams I've worked with so far have such broad range of audiences. It's incredible. I worked with Genomics England. You know, they're talking about patients with chronic illnesses, super expert surgeons, nurses, engineers. Like they have this incredibly wide spectrum of understanding. So it's incredibly important for them that they create more universal communication about what they're doing, and to constantly be thinking, how can I reframe this to make it easier for a general audience to understand? Which is why I say always be creating clarity. Use some of the tools I gave you today to think about reframing, and hopefully you've got some easier ways of doing that from today. Okay, my book, blah, 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 I'm almost done. I workshop these things all the time. It's really, I've made it really fun to go out and kind of find metaphors and reframe things, but again, I won't dwell on this. I want to leave you with this guy, because I think he actually got this really right. I won't do the accent. I'm going to Vienna next week. I especially shouldn't do the accent. Whenever I finished filming a movie, my castmates would all celebrate at the wrap party. But I felt my job was only half done. Every film had to be nurtured in the marketplace. You can have the greatest movie in the world, but if you don't get it out there, if people don't understand it, you have nothing. So the message here is never underestimate the importance of communicating our ideas, because we often don't get the feedback. We don't know whether we're truly being understood. There's almost always more leverage in putting more effort into it. A little bit less time doing, a little bit more time describing. Thanks very much. Oh, I have some books here if anybody wants them. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ben. Who would like to ask a question of Ben? Plenty to dig into. I did manage to get that Jurassic Park ethics quote into a select committee hearing once, which I was very proud of.
Fantastic.
Any questions? We've got one from Derek. If you just wait for me to come with the tiny microphone.
Grab my water bottle.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. I'm going to commandeer you at some point because you and I have lots to talk about.
Yeah.
But I'll start us with a basic question, but just thinking, what do you think are the common mistakes that people in government make when they're trying to communicate their stuff?
Well, I guess it's assuming, most of the time it's assuming shared context. In fact, even teams that do have a high degree of context need the messages repeated over and over and over again. Because my analogy is that when you're working on a piece of work over a long period of time, the original reasons you started it often get a bit lost. Imagine a telescope pointed at the moon and the moon slowly drifts out of focus. You kind of get lost in the work. And actually repeating the fundamental why, either why we're here in this meeting or why we decided to create this thing, is a super useful habit. I mean, you've got to do it quickly, right? you got to you've got to cover the grounds very, very quickly. But actually repeating the why, even though it can seem completely unnecessary, is one of the most important things you can do. Or even just getting that why sentence really, really, really sharp in the first place. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Have we got time for one more question? Over there. And while you ask and answer this, I'm going to swap the laptops over just to warn you.
Thank you. That was really useful. So I have a question for you about whether you have any views on length of content. So, I mean, in government, we produce a lot of content, right? So slide decks, reports, etc. And I think there's this general rule of thumb of you've got to keep it really short. No one has any time to read what you write, you know, and that kind of thing. And you know, there's limited time. And of course, that may well be true for very, very senior audiences, ministers, right? My view is that if you've designed something and told the story really, really well, that actually people will engage with longer form content. But I just wanted to get your view on that as a professional.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And a lot of what I try to teach people is that, yes, you can go longer if you're giving people a reason to keep listening. I think that's absolutely true. But I guess the way we should think about communication is almost like a pyramid, right? In the well, let me tell you a story that I heard in Munich a few weeks ago. There was a user researcher who came to my workshop, and she said, we used to do slide decks summarizing the research for the executive at the top of the company. And then they told us, can you just summarize it in headlines in the email? And then they told us, can you just make the subject line of the email the main point that you want to get across? Now, I don't think that's a universal rule at all, but I think it's really interesting because it points to this idea of levels, right? That you go to different levels of granularity. But the universal message actually is that one sentence is the most useful one, right? Because then you know you're able to get everybody on the same page. Like the shortest version of that report, right? The most universal statement of intent, or the why, or the goals of the project. Actually getting that stuff right first then allows you to expand on all you're saying. The problem is people start with the other method, right? They go into depth and then they cut it down, right? So yeah, I guess think about those layers. That's what I've been thinking about most. Yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, man.
Now, naturally, I'm now having some issues with the screen, which is to be expected, I guess. But I will just talk you very quickly through some final bits of housekeeping. You can enjoy this beautiful photograph of something somewhere. So a few quick parish notices. If you like this, you may enjoy the AI special of Data Bites, which is another event series I host. You can go to the public digital website to discover more about that. Connected by Data also have a data and AI public engagement community of practice. Again, go to the Connected by Data website. If you're online, you can see these. I'm afraid you can't if you're in the room. Sorry about that. A reminder that our next event, our 10th, will be Ed Humferson from the Office for Statistics Regulation, and another speaker to be confirmed on Wednesday, the 29th of October at 6 p.m. You can go to transformgov.org.uk and sign up for that. If you would like to help us organise, speak, or sponsor, get in touch with one of us in the room, or it's transformgovtalks@gmail.com. Please do tell someone how much you enjoyed tonight. Encourage them to sign up on the website as well. We want to grow this community as much as we possibly can. And all that's left for me to say is a very big thank you to all of you for joining us online, coming in person, some fantastic questions. And do join me in thanking our brilliant speakers this evening, Moira, Holly, and Ben. Thank you very much indeed. And for those of you in the room, there is pizza that has magically appeared at the back.